to have 3 skills. 1, you need to have incredibly fast reflexes. 2, you need to be quite adventurous and brave. And 3, you need to be absolutely insane because they're so dangerous.
I was going to add that one if you didn't.
Did you have a previous career? Did you
I've had a couple of previous...
Okay.
Yeah, I've had a couple of previous careers. I used to work in mental health, would you believe? And I used to work in the hospital system. And I also worked as a registered migration lawyer for some time as well.
That's the one that led you to the snake catching.
So, Mark, going from immigration, mental health to snake catching, why did you choose such a high-risk job? Not that the others aren't necessarily high risk, but anyway.
Basically, I worked as a single dad. I had 5 young daughters at the time, and I came home and I realised I needed a job, that I was my own business, I could determine my own hours, and realised to myself that I had to do something that I loved doing, and I wanted to set an inspiration and an example for my children. So I basically reset my life, did the job that I wanted to do, which is working with animals and catching snakes, and I could choose my own hours. So in the morning, I'd take my kids to school, go catch a whole bunch of venomous snakes, pick them up from school, take them home, and then go back to catching more venomous snakes.
Hey, we'll leave you there soon. We'll come back to you next time you're on. We'll talk more about dog training because you do train dogs. But a final question, and this is from a listener. How has it altered people's behaviours? You know, for example, not leaving a dog alone or always checking for guarding. Because as a New Zealander, I just can't, never lived in Melbourne, I can't fathom not going, or just going to a garden and always being vigilant that there is a deadly serpent there.
Most people in Australia, despite the fact we've got the most venomous snakes in the world, they just remain ignorant of it. They just don't realise the snakes are there, and they think it'll never happen to them until one day they see a snake, call me out and catch it. Then I speak with these people maybe weeks later or years later, and they'll tell me, from now on, after I've met you, Mark, every time I go into the garden, I'm always looking for a snake.
How about that? Hey, Mark, great to have you back on the program. Thank you very much for being with us from Melbourne.
Thanks again.
Neil Miller, not for me. Michelle, you've lived in Melbourne, Michelle?
No, I haven't. I spent some time there. I've got a sister-in-law and her whānau live there. But what a great dude. I want to know, when he's next on, ask him how many snakes he catches a day. I want to know how intense that work is.
Indeed. Neil?
I can't think of a worse job for me. It's just terrifying. I'm scared of snakes to start with. And
far easier being part of the Taxpayers Union, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're on so good, whereas snakes are evil. Right. Everybody knows that. But the fact that Australian snakes are so venomous, it's like Australia, like basically everything that lives and grows and runs around kind of wants to kill you. Spiders, scorpions, snakes. It's like, he's a brave man. And I like the fact that he acknowledges that he's probably a little insane as well.
I like it that job is COVID-proof. You know, I'm looking at all the occupations that you can have that aren't going to be bothered by whether we're having a pandemic or not. And clearly that's one of them. So maybe I should retrain.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question, though. Why has the number of snakes increased in COVID?
Maybe people are at home and seeing them more often.
That's what it is.
Okay.
That is what it is. Yep. You've been wonderful, both. Thank you very much. Michelle Acord and Neil Miller, thank you very much for the time. Thank you to Amelia Langford for putting the show together this week. And see you Monday, 3:45. Till then. Checkpoint next. Stay tuned.
Whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, round 1 to Australia as rugby prepares for its international comeback. And how do you isolate a wallaby? What special arrangements are being made for the team? We talk to New Zealand Rugby Live. A church elder at the centre of Auckland's COVID subcluster speaks out. A businessman names and shames companies he thinks should pay back the wage subsidy, but he goes one step further, offering a bounty to dob them in. An independent investigation's launched into live animal exports. And from cabin crew to cheesecake connoisseur, we meet a Hamilton woman turning her redundancy into a recipe for success. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. New Zealand Rugby say they were ready to host the Rugby Championship but accept today's decision to hold it in Australia. Governing body SANZAAR have confirmed the 4-team 6-week tournament will go ahead in New South Wales and Queensland starting November the 7th. Clay Wilson reports.
SANZAAR has given Australia the green light because of that country's more flexible quarantine rules. New Zealand Rugby admit they're disappointed at the outcome. Chief Executive Mark Robinson says they worked hard with the government and were ready to host. He says he disagrees with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's comment that SANZAAR politics were involved in the decision. This is Clay Wilson.
And there'll be more on this in the sports news. An elder of the church at the centre of Auckland's COVID-19 subcluster says he got tested for the first time today after one of the pastors called him. Another case linked to the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship has been reported today, bringing the total of confirmed cases in the group to 33. Joseph Hohepa Kotuku says that as an elder, it's his community duty to get tested.
It's for the good of community. That's what it's all about. I'm a born-again Christian, so it's all about the community, helping or exhorting one another up to do the right things that we should do.
82% of the church's congregation have now been retested. The government has agreed to pay for repatriation flights for stranded foreigners who cannot afford to buy tickets to their home countries. The Department of Internal Affairs and the Red Cross will assess which temporary visa holders qualify. The criteria for overseas workers being allowed into the country are also being eased. The Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says the change will allow businesses to access critical staff whose skills are not readily obtainable in New Zealand. Livestock exporters say the open-ended review of their trade puts millions of dollars of farmer income at risk. The Ministry for Primary Industries has commissioned the independent inquiry in the wake of the wreck of a cattle ship off the coast of Japan last week, with 43 crew and 6,000 cows on board. The Animal Genetics Trade Association says a necessary review of ship safety following a maritime disaster has morphed into an unnecessary, wider review of animal welfare. A spokesperson, David Heyman, says 27,000 cattle are awaiting export.
We need to get the trade resumed as soon as practical, and this extended process puts a lot of things at risk.
David Heyman of the Animal Genetics Trade Association. The National Party has pledged to make electric cars cheaper and nearly quadruple the number of them on the roads in 13 years if elected. Announcing the policy in Auckland today, the party's leader Judith Collins said National wants 1/3 of the government's light vehicle fleet to be electric and would also allow EVs to travel in bus lanes.
We are setting ourselves a target of 80,000 electric vehicles in New Zealand by 2023, and we believe that that is achievable.
National says there are 22,000 EVs currently on New Zealand roads. One of the last remaining members of the Māori battalion has died. Epineha Ratapu, who was 98, served in the battalion's C Company during the Second World War. He saw action in North Africa and Italy before joining J-Force in Japan. He later returned to Masterton to raise his family. The Minister for Veterans, Ron Mark, says he is lost for words.
When you lose someone of such stature and of such importance and significance as Epineha Ratapu, it has a huge impact. Yeah, it hits home. There's times like this when people come up with all sorts of quotes, and I'm lost for a suitable quote right now.
Veterans Minister Ron Mark. It's 4 minutes past 5. To sport, and as you may have heard in the news, Australia, not New Zealand, will host the upcoming Rugby Championship. Governing body SANZAAR says Australia's less onerous border and quarantine restrictions are behind the decision. New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson says it's a blow.
We're obviously disappointed here for our fans and all the rugby followers around New Zealand. It would have obviously been fantastic to be able to stage the tournament at this time of the year after the year that we've had, but we ultimately recognise and accept the decision that's been made.
Mark Robinson, the All Blacks will host Australia next month for 2 Bledisloe Cup tests before the championship. Serena Williams has been denied the chance of winning a record-equalling 24th Grand Slam tennis singles title. She has lost her US Open semi-final 1-6, 6-3, 6-3 to Victoria Azarenka of Belarus, who will play Japan's Naomi Osaka in the final. New Zealand's Lydia Ko is in a tie for 9th, 3 shots off the lead nearing the end of the first round of the ANA Inspiration, the second women's golf major of the year, an event she won in 2016. And the Los Angeles Lakers have taken a 3-1 lead in the NBA's Western Conference basketball semi-finals by beating the Houston Rockets 110-100. And the Men's Provincial Rugby Championship, the Mitre 10 Cup, kicks off tonight when North Harbour host Canterbury and Albany. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Jane Fonda on her life of activism, Merlin Sheldrake on the hidden world of fungi, linking plants in an underground network, Barbara Sumner, who says New Zealand adoption law is outdated and wrong for children, certainly wrong for her, and Dame Anne Salmond on telling the stories of Taonga. I'm Kim Hill on RNZ National from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, fine tomorrow. Auckland to Waitomo and Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Generally fine, a few showers this evening, possibly heavy. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy with hail and snow to 700 metres, easing overnight, then clearing tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Showers tonight, some heavy with small hail and snow to 700 metres, easing. Mainly fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine about Nelson and northern Marlborough. Showers elsewhere with snow to 600 metres, clearing from the south today, then fine weather. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine tonight, cloudy areas tomorrow with isolated showers, occasional rain in Fiordland later in the day. Otago and Southland, fine weather, late rain about Stewart Island tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, a few showers tonight, fine spells tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Australia's pipped New Zealand to the post for hosting rights to rugby's first big international tournament since the COVID pandemic. November's Rugby Championship, involving Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and Argentina, will be mostly played in New South Wales with a round in Queensland. New Zealand had hoped to host the 6-week tournament, but instead only 2 Bledisloe Cup games will be played here next month. Dates and venues to be announced. New Zealand Rugby's Chief Executive, Mark Robinson, joins us now. Mark, have we been robbed?
No, I mean, we've worked through a process, Lisa, where, we've done our absolute best here to try and stage the tournament. Back in July, we were obviously granted the opportunity to investigate staging the Rugby Championship in New Zealand by SANZAAR. And from that day on, we worked really hard with government to set about doing everything we possibly could to stage the tournament. But as we know, COVID has been a funny beast in our communities, and it's been something that we've found challenging to work through, and we've just had to take our time and work through the government with all the different situations and quarantine protocols that were appropriate for this. And ultimately, when it came down to it, closer to the time, the Australians were just able to provide more certainty around the quarantine situation, really. So
what do you mean by
largely what it came down to it?
Yeah, what do you mean by certainty, Mark? I mean, where did it fall down for us? What did they offer that we didn't?
Well, our quarantine situation, Lisa, was the players coming into the country would individually isolate for 4 days on arrival. From day 5 to 7, they could only train in bubble sizes of 15, and from day 8 to 14, they could not train in bubble sizes larger than 25. So when you have teams coming from places like South Africa and Argentina, where they haven't played a lot of rugby recently, that was quite restrictive in comparison to the Australians, where from day 1 they could train in unrestricted training environments right across the board with all their players and management involved. So at the end of the day, that's quite a significant difference, especially for teams who haven't been playing a lot of rugby and are travelling a long way and being asked to prepare very quickly to play rugby within 2 to 3 weeks after arriving.
So did the government do all it could to make this happen?
Oh, look, we've had a great relationship with the government all the way through this, and certainly worked very constructively and respectfully, and made them as aware as best we could what some of the requirements would be to stage a tournament of this nature here with the kind of teams we're looking to. So we respect the fact
Mark,
that
what does that really mean when you say you were making them aware of what it would take to stage a tournament here? Were you basically telling them, hey, we're not going to get over the line with this. We need you to loosen up some of these requirements, and what, they wouldn't budge on it?
Yeah, the conversations were along the lines of saying the quarantine area would be a critical part of the overall decision-making process for SANZAAR, and that is for the ability for a team, as I just described earlier, to come in and be able to prepare as freely as reasonably possible, as quickly as possible, was going to be very important in this. So we had a number of those sort of conversations, and we just have to respect the fact that the government have done a strong job in leading the country through this time, and that they had these protocols in place. And on this occasion, the protocols meant that we couldn't win the bid, unfortunately.
So, bottom line, the government lost this bid for you. Whether you respect their decision or not, we lost it because of the situation with the government's rules.
Oh, look, no, we're not apportioning blame here at all, Lisa. This is a situation... No,
it's not blame. It's just, I'm just looking at the facts here, Mark, and you've said it's because of the isolation situation. So ultimately, our rules around isolation set by the government lost this tournament for us.
They had a major part to play. I mean, SANZAAR have come out with their statement earlier on today, very clear that quarantine was a significant part to play in the decision between the two countries. And yes, I mean, we've communicated broadly with the government on a number of occasions that it was going to be challenging with these protocols in place to be able to stage the tournament. But they've got a much broader, responsibility here, Lisa, than just to rugby. And we've always acknowledged that. They are looking after a country of 5 million people and a whole lot of small businesses and interests in this country, and rugby is just a small part of it. We thought. So
on that note, when the Wallabies come here, they're going to have bespoke arrangements. Where are they going to stay, and what are the requirements going to be in terms of making it to practice venues, if indeed after 3 days they're allowed, how many did you say, 15 players together? So where are they going to stay, and where are they going to train, and how are they going to move around, because they're in essence supposed to be in isolation?
Well, they will be for those first 14 days. They will be. There's a number of different options around the country for the Wallabies to come into, but they'll be observing those protocols that I just described before, and then they'll be in a situation to be able to move from there. So I'm not exactly sure. There's been facilities set up in Queenstown, Christchurch, we're aware of, around Wellington. So we're not exactly sure where they'll come into at this stage.
No, but to be clear, when you say they're in isolation, the criteria laid out in the government media material says, the teams can play in groups of 15 as early as 3 days after arrival if they test negative for COVID-19. So what environment is there where there is accommodation on site with a rugby field where they could practice as well? Or are we talking about a situation where they're going to be busing back and forward to venues?
No, there are a number of facilities. That's what I was referring to before. These facilities I was referring to before have, they can vary, I guess, but they have gymnasiums on site. They can have training fields on site, pools on site. So,
are those hotel arrangements, Mark, or?
Oh, look, I haven't visited. I think they're arranging them. Some of them are. So I haven't been to them personally or had a lot of detail on them, but I understand that hotels are some of the arrangements.
So are you considering other options besides hotels? And have you had to provide this information at this stage to the government in order to get this greenlit?
Oh, to be clear, we don't facilitate the identification of the facilities. That's happening through quarantine and Ministry of Health. So we work with their officials, and we understand what are their preferences around facilities and what might best suit the visiting team. So there's not been New Zealand Rugby's role in this to go out and find all these facilities. We've been working very closely with the government on that.
Right. So you haven't made you haven't nominated your preferred facilities as such. You're relying entirely on them to point them out for you?
We would work with the government. That's right. We would obviously have some input around what the schedule of the teams is in terms of where they're going to play matches and how that relates to where they might go into isolation. But no, we don't determine that. We've certainly been in the hands of the government and health officials around those sorts of decisions.
Why should these teams be allowed anyway, with exceptions made to the mixing for them for rugby players? Why should they get exceptions to the rules?
Oh, look, there are a whole lot of sports going through this at the moment, Lisa, and be it netball or cricket or other sports of an international nature, football, rugby league, basketball. So this is not a special exception for rugby, I guess, as an entire country.
It is an exception for a sporting team. Ordinary people don't get these exceptions to mix and exceptions to testing regimes and isolation, so they are an exception to the rule. Why should they be?
You mean all of these sports are?
Yes, yeah, and rugby and special arrangements are being made for this.
All of those sports have been working with the government around these arrangements, and I guess when we look at it, the government has certainly had a view, as do we, as do other sports, that sport is an important part of the fabric of New Zealand and also brings a whole lot of economic impact, which is important at this time, as well as lifting the mood of a nation at a critical time. So there's been, I think, a sense that this is important for the country to help get going again, and we certainly subscribe to that. We think it would be fantastic if you can imagine 6 major match days coming to New Zealand, all sold out, all in different parts of the country, with some of those teams visiting smaller schools, having cafes and restaurants, hotels full at this time. That could have been a fantastic way for us to finish the year, and certainly part of, I guess, rugby doing its bit to help the country recover at this time.
Mark, obviously the best case scenario is where you can have people to a stadium, but is it worth going ahead with these games if we are in level 2 and you can't have a big crowd? Because that's a possibility.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's still value around that in terms of, obviously, other commercial partnerships that we have. So
you'd play them with empty stadiums if you had to?
Yeah, I mean, we're not forecasting that at the moment because these games are, over a month away. But that'd be a decision we'd have to take as we get closer to it. But at this stage, we'd certainly consider that. Absolutely. We're hopeful, that by some of the dates that are being circulated at the moment, that will be well back into level 1.
Hey, is Australia going to share any of the ticket takings with you from Oz?
The arrangements, the share arrangement for no matter where the tournament was staged, Lisa. So that's the same way in either country.
And is there any chance at all that one of these games could take place on election weekend?
Well, that's a possibility.
You're not ruling it out?
No, we have to, I guess, look at all options at the moment. That's not to say it couldn't be played on a Friday night or a Sunday around that weekend. So there are a whole lot of things that our team has sat down this morning for the first time just to consider. And we'll be working with all our commercial partners and all the relevant venue facilities and regional agencies to determine that. So it's early days in that. Like I say, we've got sort of...
It's not that early days though, is it, Mark? I mean, you don't have that much time to plan for this. It's a matter of weeks away, so you must have a preferred date. Is it that election weekend?
Oh, look, we've stood up Super Rugby Aotearoa in a matter of days. So these things, it's an incredibly fluid time at the moment. And the way that the whole world's working at the moment, certainly in things like sport and rugby, we're reacting very quickly with 24, 48 hours notice to a lot of things. So yeah, it is a possibility at the moment, Lisa. But like I say, we will know more in the next few days, and we'll be sharing that information as soon as we possibly can.
Oh, come on, Mark. Throw the fans a little summit here. Is it going to be that weekend?
It quite possibly could be, yeah. But we want to work through things a little bit more and understand things. So
that's sounding more like a yes than it's sounding like a no. Would that be fair?
I'll let you determine that, Lisa. That can be your little story with it. But no, look, we've identified a few weekends across October, and we just need a little bit more time before we can confirm that.
All right, appreciate your time this evening. That is New Zealand Rugby's Chief Executive, Mark Robinson, who is talking there about the games that are going to be held in New Zealand, even though we lost the bid to host the entire tournament. A church elder at the centre of Auckland's sub-cluster says pastors are encouraging members to get tested, and prayer meetings have been held over Zoom since the police busted an illicit gathering during last month's lockdown. There is one new community case of COVID-19 today linked to the mini-cluster from the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship Group. 82% of the church's congregation have now been retested. Amy Williams visited testing centres today and filed this report.
Members of the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship were among those getting tested in Mount Roskill today. Joseph Hohepa Kortuku says he's an elder at the church and is aware of critical comments about the congregation.
A lot of critical people that not Christians because they're not Christian. They don't understand where we stand. I see a lot of criticism, and that doesn't worry us. We're doing what God has instructed us to do through the Word of God.
Mr. Kortuku describes himself as a born-again Christian, saying God is his healer, but believes it's also important to use wisdom and abide by the law. He pointed to his cap, adorned with Bible verses and references.
You see this here on the bottom?
Yep.
What's it say?
It says, Yahweh Rapha,
Yeah.
Lord my healer.
Yeah. See, that's the fact of life in this world, in this sinful world we're living in.
Mr. Kortuku says he got a test after receiving a call from one of the church pastors encouraging him to do so. Today was his first test. Health officials have urged members of the congregation to get retested, and so far almost 20% have not. Mr. Kortuku says he attended the prayer meeting last month that was broken up by the police because it was a larger gathering than Level 3 rules allowed.
I understand that they have to do their duty because of the government law. You see, we all understand that. And we're not perfect, sort of, but we are obedient to the Word of God.
There are now 55 people linked to the community cluster who are staying in the Auckland quarantine hotel who have tested positive for COVID-19. A student at Henderson North School in Auckland was one of the 4 cases confirmed yesterday. Henderson local Paul Ragay got tested as a precaution today.
I'm a bit concerned about what's going on around, and I'm working in the mental health sector, and particularly knowing about schools and children, and very close to my heart.
The student who tested positive is a household contact of a previously reported case and had been in isolation. There are no close contacts among the Henderson North School community. Principal Irene Ogden says a lot of kids stayed home today after being given the option, but the risk is low.
We are assured by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health that we are fine as a school. So we are working hard to ensure that our children are safe.
She says the school is still open and keen to welcome students back after the weekend. The city's testing centres will be open at the weekend. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is 22 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, but I would really like to hear from you about the Wallabies coming here next month for the Bledisloe Cup games. Should they be allowed in or not? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And if you reckon they should be allowed in for the games, what weekend do you think that game should take place on? The election weekend is under consideration. A New Zealand entrepreneur is naming and shaming businesses he says are abusing the government wage subsidy scheme and should pay the money back immediately. Nick Mowbray of Zuru Toys says large corporates have been taking millions from the scheme, despite still turning significant profits and some even paying shareholder dividends. And while they might meet the criteria for the wage subsidy that pays up to $585 a week for each qualifying employee, he says ethically and morally it is wrong. So Nick Mowbray says he'll donate $1,000 for every corporate that's found to be taking unfair advantage of the government scheme that he reckons is being abused.
I just think that, so many companies are happy to privatise profits in the good times, and as soon as there are bad times, they really want to socialise any kind of potential losses and take a handout. And so many of these companies are reporting profits but taking the wage subsidy at the same time. And I just think the wage subsidy was not designed for these, large corporate companies. If you look at the NZX50 in the last 2 years, it's up almost 30%. In the last 12 months, it's up 7%. And, a lot of these companies are reporting large profits and then taking this wage subsidy at the same time. And ultimately that has to get paid or repaid by New Zealanders. And I just don't think it's fair. Capitalism isn't a one-way street. You just don't get to take the profits in the good times, and when you have bad times, put your hand out and have, hard-working Kiwis pay for that.
So who specifically are you calling out here? What examples are you thinking of?
Well, I think there are loads and loads and loads of examples, and I'm seeing more all the time, and hearing about more all the time. But there are lots of companies. I mean, take for example Somerset Villages. They're a retirement home business. Of course, the business is not going backwards. I mean, they reported $170 million of net profit last year. They have over $3 billion of assets. Their stock price, more importantly, in the last 12 months, is up 34.9%. That's about $460 million of market gains for their shareholders. In the last 12 months, it's almost a record high. There's only one time in history before this where it was higher, and that was only for a few weeks. And they've taken almost $9 million from the government and from Kiwi taxpayers. How is that fair? They just reported, earnings or preliminary earnings year to date of $45 million this year. And so I just feel like this is abusing the intent of the system. The intent of the system was to look after the builder that was, out of work, the restaurant owner that couldn't open, the tourism business that was shattered. This was the intent of the business. It was not intended to prop up corporate profits. I'll give you another one. This one's even more horrific. And I've actually reached out to their general manager in New Zealand to see if they've repaid it yet. But Estee Lauder is a global consumer goods company with a market cap of $77 billion US, so over 100 billion New Zealand dollars. They reported revenue this year of $14.6 billion, which was down 4% from $14.9 billion last year. They're in the consumer goods business, which is on fire through COVID, especially things like skincare. And they made a profit of almost $700 million US. This is a US listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, and it took almost $900,000 from the New Zealand taxpayer, which is being siphoned effectively offshore. How is it that a consumer goods company, which is the same business that we're in, is taking money from the New Zealand taxpayer?
Let's take a look at the criteria that was set around the wage subsidy scheme, right? You had to have be able to say you had a loss of 30% over a certain period of time in order to qualify for 12 weeks of the payment. The next tranche, it was a 40% loss, and the most recent one with the resurgence was a 40% loss as well. If you meet the criteria, why shouldn't you take the money?
Well, I think a lot of companies are actually manipulating that as well. So I've heard of multiple professional service firms, law firms, accountancy firms that are like delaying billing so they can actually show the 30% decline. I mean, most of them were working from home. It was business as usual. So I think there's a moral obligation, because at the end of the day, it's our children, our children's children that are going to have to pay this debt. It's $13,600 million, to put it into perspective. It's a lot of money.
So you're
and
suggesting
it has to be paid back.
So you are suggesting that some businesses have deferred transactions or payments in order to qualify, and even if they weren't doing that, you feel if they're still bringing in the bucks, even if it is at a reduced amount, they should just suck it up?
I agree. If you can financially sustain your business, then you shouldn't be taking a handout. And it's clear that lots of companies are abusing it because it's just there. And I just don't think or feel that was the true intent of the scheme. It was to help those people that really genuinely needed it. And a lot of instances, take Estee Lauder, and I have asked if they're planning on paying it back, their business is reported globally to be down 4%. 4%. And that's not due to COVID. That's due to just running their business. And so how have they taken $900,000 from the New Zealand taxpayer?
So let's play
and
devil's...
So I think there's a lot of examples where business isn't down 30 or 40%. But if you're still reporting these mega profits, for example, take Briscoe's, I think it's reported $27 million profit for the first half of the year. And they actually came out and said that after lockdown, their sales surged because all these people were sitting at home for 6 weeks saving money. They came out and their sales surged like 36 or 37 or 38%. And they took an $11.8 million wage subsidy. So in effect, New Zealanders are underwriting their wage book when their sales or their profits haven't been affected. Their profits are the same this year as they were last year.
So we're in the early stages of this, some people would argue. The pandemic is an ongoing situation. The help is available now. Could these companies not argue that they are insulating themselves against an uncertain future?
Well, clearly not, because they're reporting these profits.
Right now they are.
In the case of Somerset, they report. In the case of Somerset Homes, their stock value is up $460 million over the last 12 months. Well, 7 of that has been since COVID started. So, I mean, there's no real argument there. The fact is either they repay it or New Zealand taxpayers or workers repay it. Shouldn't these companies be paying it? And shouldn't the shareholders have some kind of fiscal responsibility? Why is it that the shareholder comes first? We're in a crisis, and this is unprecedented. Surely the shareholder can be knocked down the list a few pegs. Maybe your team members, your staff come first, and then maybe the country, and then maybe your shareholders. It's okay to have a bad year as a shareholder. Why is it that in good times they're happy to privatise all of those profits and take all of those profits off the table, but in bad times they want to socialise any potential losses? It's not fair.
I understand your argument, but how do you know that more people would not have lost their jobs if these wage subsidies hadn't been collected? Because that's the risk, isn't it? Regardless of their profit situation, they may have rationalised their businesses and cut more people if they didn't take that wage subsidy, out of their own choice, perhaps. But the person at the bottom of the heap is the one who would pay for that, isn't it?
No, because that's not them being corporately responsible. If they're producing all of these profits, the first person or the first people you should be looking after in a crisis is your team members. They are the people that look after your customers. They are effectively your family, and you look after them because it's a human thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
Yep. Nick, I understand the argument you are making, and so will a number of people. But the question remains, if they didn't take this money, they may have taken the opportunity to cut jobs. I know you say that's not the right thing to do. That's not the right thing to do morally.
Hundreds of jobs anyway. I've had people.
But how do we know more jobs wouldn't have gone? How do we know more jobs wouldn't have disappeared if they hadn't taken this money? And are you prepared? Are you prepared to kind of take that risk?
You're missing the point. The retirement village, like Somerset, their business isn't down. Their business is not going down. People aren't not going into retirement homes. That's not happening. They're an essential business. They've exploited the system. Their business isn't going backwards. Estee Lauder is in consumer goods and consumer products. Their business isn't going down.
So, Nick, let's go through the list. Briscoes, should they pay it back?
Yes.
Sky City?
Yes.
Somerset Villages?
Yes.
Estee Lauder?
Yes.
And any others on the top of your head?
Look, I think there's going to be a long, long list. I've only been looking at it for like 12 hours, and I'm even considering putting up something with people that come forward on companies that have abused the system. Zuru will donate maybe $1,000 to charity for every one. So we can see more of them and get more of them to come out of the woodwork.
So, sorry, Nick, to be clear on that, what are you proposing there, potentially?
I'm working on it now, potentially. So Zuru will give to charity $1,000 for everyone that comes forward with a company that has potentially abused the system.
And if they turn out to have abused the system, are you announcing
Correct.
this now, Nick? If it turns out that a company, in your view, has abused the system by, still collecting big profits but taking the wage subsidy as well, what commitment are you making?
We'll donate $1,000 for everyone that proves to be doing this to a charity.
And that was Nick Mowbray there. We did contact Briscoe Group boss Rod Duke. He declined to comment to Checkpoint. Sky City didn't respond to our requests for comments. Somerset has declined to comment. And we made several attempts to contact Estee Lauder, and we were unsuccessful getting through to them. Let us know what you think about that call for those companies to pay the money back. Political leaders have lined up to tell New Zealand Business how their party intends to steward this country through the economic crisis, including a plan from Labour to loosen some restrictions at the border. COVID-19 continues to cast a shadow over the election campaign, touching every area of government and every New Zealander. Business New Zealand held a virtual conference today to give leaders the opportunity to spell out their plan for the coming years. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, was there, and she filed this report.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. I know you're there somewhere, but down the other end. It's amazing how we've got so used
National's Judith Collins was one of several leaders to lay out their remedy. She's calling for a halt to the massive borrowing program that's resulted in billions of dollars being pumped into the economy.
It's a $29 billion in additional borrowing, equal bringing it back to hospitals, the building of 50 new hospitals. It's that big for us, and we cannot continue to have this line of economic morphine in our bloodstreams anymore.
Ms Collins says the money already borrowed on behalf of New Zealanders must be spent wisely.
My plea is that we don't just spend. My plea is that we borrow as though we would for our own businesses, that we borrow to build. We borrow to build an economy, we borrow to build a future, and we borrow to build productivity.
Greens co-leader James Shaw says today's politicians have a responsibility to tomorrow's taxpayers.
To ensure that every dollar that we can of that stimulus goes towards resolving some of those long-term challenges, particularly in the fields of our built environment and infrastructure. It does mean that our infrastructure companies are going to have to retool so that they're not just building four-lane motorways in a very few parts of the country.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters outlined his prescription for future success.
And if we're going to go into this election with mindless and, dare I say it, inexperienced, extreme ideology, then we're going to face a disaster. As I said, don't let them stuff the country.
Even if New Zealand returns to the relative normalcy of level 1, the ongoing closure of the border continues to have a substantial impact on many sectors, like tourism and education. ACT leader David Seymour says this country should not have a blanket approach to allowing people from elsewhere into New Zealand.
At present, we spend far too much time treating people from every destination the same, when we know there are countries with COVID and countries without, countries with good public health and countries without. We need to start being strategic and going country by country.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern acknowledged border settings need to be constantly reviewed, unveiling a plan to loosen restrictions if re-elected.
Our plan is to reserve 10% of places at our managed isolation and quarantine facilities for workers critical to New Zealand industry and our economic recovery. Our plan to keep New Zealand moving requires us to position ourselves globally as a place to trade and invest in, a place where we intend to bounce back faster, with an economy that is more open than many other countries.
Speaking to reporters afterwards, she said the fact New Zealand's in a position to be looking at this is significant. As Ardern says, while there's no plan to allow large numbers of foreign students back in this year, some could come back to New Zealand under the new rules.
We are ready and willing to have a conversation within that 10% around the international student market. It is fair to say, though, it could not accommodate the totality, because that was the equivalent of tens of thousands of individuals. But there are those who, for instance, are working in the postgraduate environment where there is additional extra justification for wanting to gain access, and we will work through that with our education institutions as well.
Ms Ardern also said Labour would work on an investment plan alongside the ongoing trade program to encourage foreign capital into New Zealand. National's announcement on the campaign trail today was a pledge to make electric cars cheaper and to quadruple the number of the vehicles on the road by 2033. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, the father of New Zealand man Lockie Ballaby, missing from the sunken cattle ship Gulf Livestock One, joins us live. Christchurch Hospital will get hundreds of new car parks, and a sweet deal how a Hamilton woman turned her COVID redundancy into a dessert business. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. In particular, let us know what you make of New Zealand hosting those 2 Bledisloe Cup games. That'll be in October. And do you agree with Nick Mowbray, who reckons companies making profits who have taken the wage subsidy should pay it back? Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
New Zealand Rugby says it was prepared to host this year's Rugby Championship, but it says it accepts the decision to hold it in Australia. SANZAAR has confirmed the 4-team 6-week tournament will go ahead in New South Wales and Queensland, starting on November the 7th. Meanwhile, Rugby NZ has told Checkpoint one of the Bledisloe Test matches against Australia could be played here during election weekend. An elder of the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship Church says it was his community duty to get tested for COVID-19. The church is at the centre of Auckland's subcluster, which now has a total of 33 cases linked to it. Joseph Hohepa Kotuku says he got tested today after one of the pastors called him. The government has agreed to pay for repatriation flights for stranded foreigners who cannot afford to buy tickets home. The Department of Internal Affairs and the Red Cross will assess which temporary visa holders qualify. The criteria for overseas workers being allowed into the country are also being eased so businesses can access critical skilled staff. Livestock exporters say farmers risk losing millions of dollars of income due to an inquiry commissioned by the Ministry for Primary Industries. The independent review follows the wreck of a cattle ship off the coast of Japan last week, with 43 crew and 6,000 cows on board. The Animal Genetics Trade Association says 27,000 cattle are awaiting export. The National Party is promising to make electric cars cheaper and nearly quadruple the number of them on the roads in 13 years if elected. National says it would like to make 1/3 of the government's light vehicle fleet electric and would also let electric vehicles travel in bus lanes. One of the last remaining members of the Māori battalion, Epineha Ratapu, has died at the age of 98. Mr Ratapu served in the battalion's Sea Company during the Second World War and fought in North Africa and Italy before joining J-Force in Japan. He later returned to Masterton to raise his family. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, the manufacturing sector, it continues to shed jobs, you say. What new info do we have?
Yeah, this is according to BNZ's Performance of Manufacturing Index, or the PMI. And like a lot of the indicators we pay attention to, a lot of them are forward-looking. This one's backwards-looking, and it gives us a pretty accurate picture of what happened in the month of August. And it shows that activity in the month did take a bit of a hit due to those latest restrictions. However, with this index, any reading above 50, that indicates growth. Anything below signals contraction. Well, even though manufacturing activity did take a bit of a hit, it's still in growth territory. It's at 50.7. However, the real concerning figure is the employment sub-index. It gained 2 points to 49, but it's still below 50, and it's been that way for the past 6 months in a row. It points to job losses. And this has been a real constant pattern with this index because we've had these really big wild swings across all of these indicators. But amid all of that, it is the employment indicator that has continued to be under 50. And BNZ senior economist says the likelihood of more lockdowns is really adding to this concern amongst employers about really taking on more people. So I guess what BNZ is really saying is that firms, it's a thing we hear about from companies all the time, they need certainty and confidence before they even begin to think about taking on new staff. Well, at the time, certainty and confidence, it's something that's really hard to come by. And interestingly, at the moment, we got these numbers from BNZ. They also put out their latest numbers for job listings. This is a figure they use to measure about, how many jobs are there available in the market. That's down by 3% over the month of August, which may not sound like too much, but it's still down by about 32.5% on the same month a year ago. So there's no real easy way to spin this. The employment sector is just really, really tough at the moment, and all the numbers we're getting at the moment indicate that the labour market is going to continue to look like this for quite some time.
Okay, well, let's change gears here to another kind of commodity. Red gold, it seems. Tomatoes are going up and up in terms of price. What's going on here, Nicholas? I
know, talk about news you can use. So the price of tomatoes rose about 38% over the month of August, taking them to $13.65 a kilo. And before everyone gets in and starts texting and telling me that, August is the month when tomato prices usually peak. However, what we've seen is over the past few years is that peak has begun to soften year on year. So what's really driving driving up this recent price spike, is actually that there's been a bit of a tomato shortage. Stats NZ says that due to the uncertainty of COVID-19, many growers have delayed or have reduced planting tomato crops. The industry is also not helped out by the fact that we've heard plenty of reports about how fruit and seasonal producers of things like fruit and vegetables, how they've been facing these looming concerns around staff shortages going into the future. So throw that into the mix, as well as the fact that there have been significant rises in the price of both the emissions trading scheme and natural gases. And this has added extra pressures on winter tomato growers as the cost for heating greenhouses has actually gone up. Glasshouses, that is, sorry. So for the month of August, fruit and vegetables on the whole were up by about 3%, but it's not just tomatoes that we saw these big gains in their value. The humble potato, which actually is in season, that's up 37%. Courgettes, they're out of season, so their price increase of 183%.
Yeah, they're a shocker at the moment. Yeah,
unbelievable. But lettuce, it's always in season. That's up 24%. And same with the cucumber. That's increased by nearly 40%. But not all fruit and vegetables did increase over the month. We saw the price of nectarines, onions, pineapples and olives actually decrease in price. So if you're like me, when you are buying your vegetables, you're only interested in what's in season, what's cheap, looking for those bargains. I guess we've got the baseline ingredients there for quite an interesting looking salad. But with the higher fruits and vegetables, they were partially offset by lower prices for chicken, instant coffee, if that's what you're into, and also honey was down by 23%.
Okay, well, what are the numbers from the market today?
So it's been a roller coaster of a week. The NZX Top 50 is now down half a percent, about 0.45, or by about 64 points to 11,748. Our dollar is at 66.6 US cents, 91.6 Australian and 51.9 British pence. And gold is down $14 to 1,939 US dollars an ounce. And just one thing on that, I've had a bit of criticism. People say they don't like hearing gold in US dollar terms. So that's about 2,910 New Zealand dollars.
Thanks, Nicholas. Next week we'll bring in the tomato index instead. The Ministry for Primary Industries has launched an independent review into livestock exports by ship. The move was sparked by the capsize and sinking of the Gulf Livestock 1 in the East China Sea, which had 43 crew and nearly 6,000 cattle on board. However, neither side in this contentious issue is happy. Rural reporter Maya Burry has more.
Days after the Gulf Livestock 1 vessel went down, MPI announced an immediate but temporary ban on live exports. Today it's commissioned an independent investigation to be led by Michael Heron QC, which is expected to take about a month. MPI says the review will be focused on shipments by sea and will consider the susceptibility of stock to harm and distress on the journey. But Marianne McDonald from the animal rights group SAFE says MPI has been looking into the live export trade since it began a separate review last year.
A review at the moment seems to be MPI's response to everything. It just seems like the government is stalling. I mean, we're still waiting for the results of the first live export review that was announced back in June last year. And, you know, it's just ridiculous.
She says it's very clear the practice needs to be banned.
I mean, this just is a trade that's not worth the risk. It's certainly not worth the risk to animals. And in this most recent case, the people have been tragically killed. And it's not worth the risk for New Zealand's reputation.
A group representing exporters, the Animal Genetics Trade Association, says the safe shipping of people and animals to their destination is hugely important to its trade. But a spokesperson, David Heyman, says a necessary review of ship safety following a maritime disaster has inexplicably morphed into an unnecessary wider review into the welfare of animals.
We 100% agree that the review needs to address the factors of ship safety and why this accident happened and the tragic results of that accident with the people and the cows. But we think that the animal welfare issue has already been addressed in the review that was started last year and has been running for some time and will get dealt with, no doubt, after the election.
David Heyman says while the suspension is in place, the costs are piling up. 27,000 cattle supplied by farmers here are waiting to be exported and ships are sitting at ports. Mr Heyman is also the managing director of an export company responsible for 5,000 of these cows. He says millions of dollars of farmer income is being put at risk.
Each one of us has got a huge amount invested in preparing those cattle to go into the pre-export isolation on top of the money that we've got to pay for farmers. In our own case, our business relies on trade finance from our bank, and we're at a current point that I'm not sure quite how we're going to deal with it, but we need to pay farmers $8 million over the next few days, and this suspension has put us in a very awkward position.
The Ministry for Primary Industries Director General Ray Smith declined to be interviewed. In a statement, he says at the heart of the Ministry's decision was a commitment to helping ensure people and animals on livestock export boats are safe. He says it's had assurances animals currently on pre-export isolation farms are in good condition and are well looked after. The Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, also declined to be interviewed, but said he fully supported the review. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
It's 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A Hamilton woman who's turning her redundancy into a budding dessert business is encouraging other people to look beyond job ads for their next chapter. Donna Williams is among the thousands of Air New Zealand staff who have lost their jobs this year. But despite a year of massive challenges, her new business is taking off, proving to be a recipe for sweet success. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blakeperson paid her a visit to hear all about it.
Big bright signage greets hungry customers at Donna Williams' new Hamilton dessert shop. It reads, "If all the raindrops were lemon drops and gumdrops, oh what a rain that would be."
It's about taking things that happen to us and things in our life and making something positive out of it. It's like the cloud with a silver lining.
Donna of Ngāti Tuwharetoa is a master at finding silver linings. Her Gumdrops dessert shop is a new beginning in what's been an incredibly tough 12 months. In October last year, her mum passed away from cancer, and 10 weeks ago, her husband of 33 years had a fatal heart attack. In between, the mother of four lost her job as an international flight attendant with Air New Zealand.
COVID came along and we knew that things weren't going to be good in the airline industry, and of course redundancy came, and so I took my redundancy package and I put it into the business, into the shop. I was scared, but I also know that in a time where people can't travel, we like to eat, us Kiwis. And this shop is as Kiwi as it gets.
Donna's dream of selling delicious banoffee pies, perfect pavlovas, tasty trifles and cheesecakes has been bubbling away for a while. Her husband Jason was her #1 cheerleader, and the sticky date pudding she sells was his favourite.
He used to say, you can do everything that you put your mind to, you can do. Just encouragement. He was just always there, and he was just always there as my mate.
Jason was encouraging her right up until the end, passing away shortly after a celebration dinner for her new venture.
I signed the lease at 5 o'clock on the day that my husband passed away. So he passed away at, I think it was 20 past 11 at night. And for me, it was a huge blessing, because for me, it was a clear path forward. And I know that if I hadn't made that decision, if we hadn't done that, then I would have been floundering to know what to do in moving forward.
Donna's not alone in her new pursuit. It's a family affair with everyone pitching in. Daughter Stevie is a business partner after also losing her job, and says it's been a huge boost for the whānau.
This has been such a positive experience for our family and for myself, having lost my job in the airline industry, and just coming here now and setting up. It's like a family business. It's a home for us now, so it's really positive.
I mean, I've had a life of cooking for my family and all that, and to me it's just real simple and easy.
The desserts are proving to be a recipe for success. The shop opened its doors last week to hordes of hungry customers.
We had people all out the front, and I'm talking like cars everywhere, mobs of people standing out the front. It was so good.
And they keep coming back.
The gnocchi's my favourite. I've tried it before and I've had it like 4 times now, so I'm here to get it again. I had a spoon of gnocchi of my mum's and I've been wanting it since, so here we are.
It tastes like someone would make it at home and not all full of chemicals. It's fantastic.
Snickers cheesecake and Oreos cheesecake, and here because who doesn't love pudding? Yeah.
Donna says while some of her former colleagues have also found new pursuits, it's hard times for everyone losing jobs, with COVID turning people's lives upside down. She's feeling for those figuring out what their next step is.
However you're feeling through this redundancy period, that there are people you can reach out to. There are people who've been through what you're going through. People heal people. So when we're around other people, that's where our strength comes from.
Strength Donna Williams has in spades. I kirikiri roa mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake person aho.
And we'll put that video up online so you can see the amazing treats Donna is turning out. Rivals on the track, but mates off it. 2 of New Zealand's best sprinters are working together to try to qualify for next year's Tokyo Olympics. National 200-metre record holder Joseph Miller has shifted from Tauranga to Wellington to train alongside national 100-metre champion Eddie Osai-Nketia. Their form will be tested at one of the first meetings of the season in Hawke's Bay this weekend. Barry Guy and Dom Thomas went along to one of their trainings at Newton Park in Wellington.
A cold, blustery day in the capital is no deterrent for athletes trying to get to the Olympics. Going through drills on your own isn't fun, but having a competitive training partner presents the challenges top athletes are after.
Whatever we do, there's always going to be rivalry, like even in the training grounds and like on competition, like it's always going to be rivalry. But at the end of the day, we're just really good mates.
I think Eddie's very happy to have someone who's going to keep him honest, and vice versa. When we turn up for training, knowing that if I'm not giving everything, or I'm slacking off, or he's slacking off, that the other person's going to get them, and neither of us want that.
2019 wasn't a great year for Miller. A couple of training accidents, a string of injuries, while his mother was diagnosed with cancer. 2020 didn't start well either, missing the Nationals and then having the Olympics postponed. So the 27-year-old felt he needed a new start, and shifting to Wellington after the first lockdown was a positive move.
Knowing that things are where they need to be and all tracking in the right direction, it's sort of one of those things that the better it goes, the better you feel, and therefore the better it goes, and it sort of builds on top of each other.
Osai-Nketia, who is the son of 100-metre record holder Gus Nketia, says it's great having Miller in the lane next to him.
Because he brings the competitive side of me, and I need the competitive side in training. He helps me, I help him. It's like we're helping each other out, and it's really great to have him here.
The partnership may be working well now under coach Gary Henley-Smith, but Miller admits Osai-Nketia was a bit apprehensive about the relationship at first.
I think he said to Gary a couple of times, why is Joseph doing that? If I get faster, doesn't that make it harder on him? And Gary had to sort of explain to him, well, yeah, but that means Joseph's going to have to run harder to beat you.
And it's that attitude that Henley-Smith is trying to get from his runners. They'd worked well together before, but this more permanent arrangement has certainly helped both of them.
For certain activities such as doing starts and those sorts of things, yes, really has been beneficial for both of them, and gives them, that brings that competitiveness in training, which I think Joseph's missed over the last couple of years. He's given Eddie an idea what it is like to be a full-time athlete, and Joseph's very strict on himself, and he really wants to be at the Olympics next year. And I think it's sort of maybe shown Eddie what he needs to be doing, and I think Eddie's learnt a lot over the last 7 weeks.
While Joseph Miller can focus solely on getting to Tokyo, Eddie Osai-Nketia still has to finish off his last year at school.
Well, to be honest, I just want to get school done. Because pretty much I'm just over it. No offense, but it's just so long. I'm just about done with it. I just want to get this done and dusted.
The frustrations of youth. For Checkpoint, Barry Guy.
And we'll put Barry Guy's video piece up on our Facebook page. Some of your feedback before the news on Nick Mowbray calling for companies, big companies that are still making profits, to return wage subsidies that they've taken from the government. This listener, Adrian, says, congratulations to Nick for speaking out. We need to put the heat on some businesses who cream profits in good times and are quick to take advantage of taxpayers. Another person says, Marion says, go Nick. I hope he publishes widely the results of his research on companies who have rorted the wage subsidy handout. This person says, I don't agree with Nick. Sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't. The government made a blanket policy of assistance. Fair enough. If you qualify, you apply, and there it is. If you don't qualify, you don't. Get over it. But someone else says, totally agree with Nick.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The head of New Zealand Rugby says the country's quarantine protocols were a significant factor in New Zealand losing its bid to host the Rugby Championship. The 6-week tournament will be played in Australia instead because of the more flexible quarantine rules across the Tasman. Mark Robertson told Checkpoint that had it been held in New Zealand, visiting players would have been required to individually isolate for 3 days, then spend another 4 days in a bubble of 15 players before moving to a bubble of 25. In contrast, players will have unrestricted access to training in Australia from day one. The one new community case of COVID-19 recorded today is linked to the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship Bereavement Group. The Ministry of Health says there are now 33 cases in the fellowship group and 13 in the bereavement subcluster, plus a number of interrelated cases and contacts. It says that in response to a request for all members of the congregation to be retested, 82% had complied by early this morning. The Labour leader says New Zealand's been gradually making changes at the border to allow more people in, and restrictions could be loosened even further. Jacinda Ardern says a Labour government would dedicate 10% of spaces in managed isolation to critical and skilled workers needed by local businesses. She says while there's no plan to allow large numbers of foreign students back in this year, some could return under the new rules.
We are ready and willing to have a conversation within that 10% around the international student market. It is fair to say, though, it could not accommodate the totality, because that was the equivalent of tens of thousands of individuals. But there are those who, for instance, are working in the postgraduate environment.
Jacinda Ardern says that would mean about 14,000 workers a month could enter New Zealand. Officials in the US state of Oregon say more than 500,000 people have now been ordered to evacuate because of a wave of wildfires. That's more than a tenth of the state's entire population. Hundreds of homes have been destroyed and at least 3 people have died in the fires. The BBC's David Willis reports from Los Angeles.
Nearly 40 fires have broken out in Oregon in the space of the last few days, and several small towns have been all but completely destroyed. High temperatures and warm seasonal winds are continuing to make life difficult for firefighters across the west coast, and much of the region is still shrouded in a thick layer of smoke.
David Willis in Los Angeles. A court has heard that auditors visited 2 companies associated with the Comancheros gang to look at their finances within a couple of weeks of each other, while the police had them under surveillance. 5 people are on trial in the High Court in Auckland on money laundering and drug charges. In an intercepted phone call played to the jury, one of them, Pasilika Naufahu, can be heard laughing about an associated company coming up clean in an audit. The Crown earlier said that that company, which is linked to another defendant, was used to pay the Comancheros pretend salaries. It's 3 minutes past. Actually, no, let me just read the story first. Rugby returns tonight to one of the country's busiest stadiums after a 6-month hiatus. North Harbour Stadium is hosting the season's first provincial championship game, North Harbour versus Canterbury. The head of stadiums at Regional Facilities Auckland, James Parkinson, says the game will be played under strict COVID-19 gathering rules. He says there will be 4 bubbles of 100 people in the stadium.
They have their own point of entry into the venue, and from that point they've got their own unique access way into their respective area in the venue. They've got their own food and beverage facilities and own bathroom facilities.
James Parkinson says this game is a small first step in a long recovery for the sector. It's 6:04. In other sports news, some All Blacks may opt out of travelling to the Rugby Championship on Australia. As you may have heard earlier, Australia has won the hosting rights for the 6-week tournament involving New Zealand, Australia, Argentina and South Africa in November and December. If New Zealand's current quarantine rules still apply when the players return home from the tournament, they could still be in isolation at Christmas. New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson says they'll work closely with the players on this.
This challenge of doing what they're about to undertake is going to be significant, and we will back them and their families in whatever way we need to make sure that they're looked after appropriately. And if that means, they're unable to assemble or travel, then we'll certainly hear that out and support that.
Mark Robinson. Silver Ferns defender Karen Berger is leaving the ANZ Premiership Netball Championships, the Central Pulse, and joining this year's runners-up, the Mainland Tactics. With Katrina Rore and Callie Jury, the Pulse's preferred defence combination, Berger got limited court time with the team. Her arrival at the Tactics is offset, though, by the loss of Temalisi Whakahokotau, who, after 4 seasons in Christchurch, is leaving to join the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic. And New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko is tied for 5th, 1 shot off the lead after the first round of the ANA Inspiration, the second major of the year. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I didn't think, Karen, that we'd be talking 5 weeks later and we're still facing weeks, of lockdowns. I didn't believe, never would have believed that was possible.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
All the wardens pretty much resigned, and it was 75 wardens that decided they didn't want to be wardens anymore.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, fine tomorrow. Auckland to Waitomo and Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Generally fine weather, a few showers tonight, possibly heavy. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy with hail and snow to 700 metres, easing overnight, then clearing tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Showers tonight, some heavy with small hail and snow to 700 metres, mainly fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine about Nelson and northern Marlborough. Showers elsewhere with snow to 600 metres, clearing from the south, then fine weather. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine tonight. Cloudy areas tomorrow with isolated showers, occasional rain in Fiordland later in the day. For Otago and Southland, fine weather. Late rain about Stewart Island tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, a few showers today, fine spells tomorrow. RNZ National, 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The family of a New Zealander who was on board the cattle ship which sunk in the South China Sea says they've received information that survivors may still be found. Lockie Ballaby is a herd manager on board the Gulf Livestock One and has not been located since the ship hit a typhoon last week. The Japanese Coast Guard has called off its full-time search, with 40 crew members still unaccounted for. Lockie's father, Guy Ballaby, joins me now. Good evening, Guy. It must be an incredibly tough week for your family, so thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. What can you tell us is the latest information?
Well, the latest information we have heard has come from the interview with one of the surviving Filipinos, and we hadn't heard this interview up until last night. And we've been in contact with Australian friends, and what has come to light is that he was washed overboard as everyone was preparing to get into a lifeboat. Now, there's 4 life rafts missing and 1 lifeboat missing. So, and there's also been, in the whole search area, after picking up 2 survivors and another Filipino who has since died, then we expect to either find bodies or other debris that would indicate where the other survivors, where the other sailors were, and there's been nothing. So we're hoping that they're all in that lifeboat somewhere or on a life raft because they're not unaccounted for.
So, Guy, when the surviving crew member says they were preparing to get into those life rafts and boat, does he mean everyone was up on deck, or have you had any information about that?
Everyone was mustered into the the bridge, and they'd taken a roll call, and they were preparing to get. Everyone had their life jackets on, and they were preparing to get into the lifeboat. And when the Stella was washed overboard, that's as far as what we know. And then with the debris and whatever that's been found, the other lifeboat's been found. It was damaged with no one in it, and so there's one lifeboat missing. So we are hoping that whole crew has got into that. And the Japanese have done an amazing job searching and finding the two survivors so far. But we wonder, with all the winds and the tides and the currents, whether the search should be further afield. And there's lots of uninhabited islands in this area that are quite leafy, so it's not like a desert island with one tree on it. And we wondered if we are hoping that they could be on one of these islands or bobbing about in the China Sea without being found yet. It's a large area, and they could be 1,000 kilometres away by now. So we don't know, which is why we would like the search to be recommenced on a wider scale.
So what communication are you getting from New Zealand authorities, and how can they help you with this? Because obviously the Japanese Coast Guard has called off its full-time search. So what's being done at the New Zealand end?
I'll hand you over to Lucy, actually, because she's been more onto this than me. Here she is.
Thank you, Guy.
Hello.
Hi, Lucy. So Lucy joins me now, and Lucy's Lockie's mum. So, Lucy, what's been happening at the New Zealand end with authorities? How are they helping?
They've been a tremendous help up until now. We've had MFAT who have been corresponding with the Japanese Coast Guard. So we feed any information that the Japanese Coast Guard has on hand to MFAT and then to ourselves and the family of the other New Zealander. We've also been in touch with, we're also in correspondence with Maritime New Zealand, who also rings us daily. So any questions we have had, we put to them, and they come back with information as fast as they can.
Can they help you get the search fired back up again?
I'm unclear about this. I've talked to MFAT today, and we were just gathering more details. We have a marine specialist helping us at the moment, so we needed more information, for example, coordinates of where the distress signal was, where the survivors were picked up, etc. So we've been mapping where these, whatever has been found with the drift rate, where any more survivors, raft or boat, could have ended up. So I'm actually unsure. I've got the contact for the weekend for MFAT, Foreign Affairs. I actually don't know. This is our next big question. With the information that we now know, where do we go next?
Have you had any conversations with the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister?
No, not to date.
So would you like the New Zealand government's help to get a search going again?
We definitely would. There's 40 people out there unaccounted for, and we're doing this not just for us on Lockie, who we would so dearly love home, as any parent could imagine when you lose or have a son missing at sea. We're doing this for the other family of the other New Zealand family, the 2 Australian families, and also for all those Filipino families who we all have sons missing at sea. We're doing it for everybody. We would love some help. And I know the Australians are starting to make a small move. So this is all just starting, momentum's just starting today. We would really appreciate any support we can get from the government, or they come to us.
So, Lucy, when was the last time you heard from Lockie?
The day that his ship went missing. The day that his ship went missing, about 10 hours beforehand. One of the family has heard from him a bit more recently, that maybe 6 hours beforehand. They had internet on board, so he was messaging us.
And what was he saying about what was going on at that point?
He was talking about the sea conditions and how rough it was, and also he was describing how the tilt of the boat which was 35 degrees, which is indicating it was very rough. His spirits were fairly high. He was tucking himself into a space where he wasn't thrown around so much, so he could get some rest. It was nighttime, so they had been told to go and get some rest, and the distress signal, of course, was alerted at about 1:30 in the morning. So a lot of them had some rest before the distress signal went out.
So is Lockie experienced at sea? Was this his first trip, or?
Yeah, this was his first ocean adventure. Yep, but he has experienced in the water. But the sea, this was his first sea adventure. He's very experienced in rivers and in lakes.
And so his job, what was his job on the boat?
It was like animal health herd manager. So he was responsible for going around and checking all the stock. And if any of the stock looked anything unwell, he would then report back to the vets who would go and check that out. So they did many daily checks on the animal welfare.
Did Lockie, in the contact you had with him, did he express any concerns about, prior to the day that the ship went missing, did he express any concerns about the condition of the Gulf Livestock 1 or the crew or the way that ship was being run?
He didn't. No. He was really enjoying the experience and the people he was meeting on board. He didn't. He's a very confident boy. He always takes everything in his stride. Like if he comes up against a problem, he just keeps on stepping up. So if he was getting anything, any concern, he wouldn't have transferred it to us. He only described the sea conditions as being how they were very large. No, he didn't.
Okay, so on that last communication that you had from him, was there any indication that they would need to leave the ship or that things were getting to a critical point?
No, there wasn't.
Okay. Is he, well, he sounds pretty resourceful. Would that be fair, Lucy?
Oh, extremely resourceful. Yep, very. And and he's also very encompassing. He's very good at looking after people around him. Pulling people through situations which have unexpected situations. I've been with him before like this, and he's amazing. People look towards him as a leader.
Have you had an opportunity to talk to any of the Australian families?
No, we haven't.
Okay. So if right now you could speak to the government, you could speak to the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and the Foreign Minister Winston Peters, tell us right now what you want from the government.
We're really pleading for the government to step up and help the Japanese Coast Guard, who have been really awesome so far and have had to scale back their search. We really ask New Zealand to go and step in and go and help the Japanese Coast Guard and search for areas which we are starting to identify may have been missed out in the Japanese search, although we actually don't know because we haven't got exact details of where the search was. with the Australians are starting to do the same, so maybe the two countries could join together. We've got 2 New Zealanders, 2 Australians out there and many more missing. Really plead on behalf of any New Zealand parent, mother, father, who have sons missing, children missing, to do this.
So
I think it would give New Zealanders so much hope. I think if we all knew that when things go wrong outside of our own countries, that the government has our backs.
So you actually want New Zealand resources to join the search on the ground?
If possible. I have no knowledge of what New Zealand has as resources, but definitely we need some sort of impetus now for New Zealand government to step up and look after and encourage a search. To resume the search with the Japanese Coast Guard, to maybe, I don't know what, maybe we've got access to an Orion to go and search some of these areas. Really not sure how it works. It's just, I'm totally out of my league.
You're desperate to get it going.
Done? Absolutely desperate. We've got like a 2 or 3 day window before, if they are in a life raft, before they're going to get very uncomfortable. They've been in a life raft now, if they are, whoever, they've been in there for 7 days. People can last in a life raft for quite some time, but they will be getting very uncomfortable now if they still are in a life raft or on a uninhabited island and maybe injured. And we've really got to help these boys.
Lucy, you're holding on to that hope, are you?
Oh, yes, most definitely. We have not given up.
I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for speaking to us. That is Lucy, and I was talking to Guy Ballaby earlier, the parents of Lockie Ballaby, who is the herd manager on board the Gulf Livestock One, and he hasn't been located since that ship was hit by a typhoon last week. They are appealing for help to get that search going again. It is 21 minutes past 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government has announced hundreds of new car parks it hopes will solve the ongoing issues at Christchurch Hospital. Parking was significantly reduced after the earthquakes, forcing patients, visitors and staff to park far away and walk or catch a shuttle to the hospital. The government's pledging a new building and extension of staff car parking. Sally Murphy reports.
Parking's been at a premium around Christchurch Hospital. Some nurses have arrived at work hours early and slept in their cars in order to get a park. There have also been attacks on nurses walking to their cars late at night. Today, the government's promised to add another 2 floors to the staff car parking building, an additional 238 parks. It's also unveiled plans for a new 450-space public car park to be developed and managed by Ngaitahu Property. Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, says the solutions are long overdue and will go a long way to mitigate issues.
Look, I think it's a priority for the people of Christchurch. The fact that we have staff who don't feel safe, leaving shift work to go to their cars. We have people who have appointments at the hospital who haven't been able to find adequate parking. It's been a priority for me because it's a priority for Christchurch.
The government will put in $14.25 million towards the 2 projects. New Zealand Nurses Organisation spokesperson Cheryl Hannam says it's been frustrating waiting for a solution, but it's good to finally see progress.
I don't think when you have one of the busiest EDs in the Southern Hemisphere on this site, that 450 is enough. It's a start. You've also got to look that people who are coming to the hospital may have elderly and infirm that aren't able to walk the distance, but certainly, it's a start. It's by no means going to meet the need of such a busy hospital.
Ms Hannam says after a spate of assaults over recent years, some nurses still don't feel safe walking to and from their cars.
We'd like to see some assurances that some of those car parks will be for nursing staff, because certainly there's nowhere near the number of staff car parks available at this point in time.
The new car parks, along with a park and ride option on Deans Avenue, brings the total to just under 1,500 parks. The new building and expansion should be complete within 2 years. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Added star power is boosting rugby's Wharapama Cup this season, with COVID-19 forcing the cancellation of the latter part of the World Sevens series. This year's National Women's Provincial competition includes some of the world's best in the seven-a-side game. Clay Wilson and video journalist Dan Cook headed to Northland to see how the country's newest provincial team is benefiting from a couple of Black Ferns stars.
It might not be Paris, Los Angeles or London, but for Portia Woodman and Tyler Nathan Wong, the Kitty Kitty Rugby Club isn't a bad spot either.
We're used to travelling around the world to all these different exotic places and all these different cultures, but for me there's no place like home. Just being able to spend this quality time in New Zealand is something that we probably would never have had the opportunity to do. World
Cups, World Series titles and Commonwealth Games gold. The Black Fern Sevens pair are two of women's rugby's biggest stars. They're getting just as much, though, from being part of a Northland outfit in just their second season in the national competition. Woodman says it's been a grounding experience getting to know her new Cody teammates.
Their mums, their teachers, their students, they're girls that have got their lifestyle and they fit in their passion after work. And to kind of vibe off them and to know that they're doing this for the pure and absolute love of this game, it makes me realise how lucky we are in the lifestyle that we have. And yeah, these girls are cool, man. They give it to you, they give you stick, but then they've got your back no matter what, and you can't ask for anything better.
In total, 15 from the Black Fern Sevens squad are taking part in this year's Wharapama Cup. And Cody coach Cheryl Smith is pretty happy with the two she's got.
For our young Northland girls to see superstars on TV and then now to be actually running beside them every Saturday, it just lifts them. Like, you can see them buzzing.
That much is definitely true for Louisa Tubailangi. The 18-year-old dreams of joining her new teammates in the Black Fern Sevens and becoming the team's first Fijian-born player.
I remember them coming to speak to us for the under-18s, because I was under-18s last year, and holy, I didn't expect to play alongside them this year. Yeah, I was just still starstruck. Yeah.
Commitment has been crucial to Woodman and Nathan Wong's success. It's a quality the rest of this Northland squad also knows all about, travelling twice a week from all over the far north region to train here in Kirikiri. For some, a return journey of up to 5 hours. Another young player, Georgia Briley, is among that group making the longest trip.
I'll leave work at 3:30 and I'll drive up to Whangarei, catch the van from Whangarei to here, get here at 6:30, we'll do our training, have a feed after training, which is good, and then drive back home. I usually get home at 11:30 midnight, so it's a long day.
At just over an hour, Nathan Wong's trek to training is comparatively more manageable. The Auckland-born and bred star, who has Northland roots on her father's side, is currently based in the small North Hokianga settlement of Broadwood. A change of pace she's relishing.
Just surrounded by nature, there's a river, just down from the house, and there's a tiny little community gym that is available, and only pretty much myself, my partner, and maybe some of the school kids really go to, and there's a shop that's pretty much most of Broadwood there.
For Woodman, the Northland connection runs deep. The 29-year-old hails from Kaikohe and is living there with her auntie during her time back in the region. It's also home for Cody coach Cheryl Smith.
It's just brought a real buzz to the community, and for Portia as well. It's been grounding for her. It was something she always wanted to do, and it's just been nice to have her come home and enjoy it.
And she hasn't been the only one. Woodman says her return has also been huge for her whānau. What has it meant to them to see you come back and play for Kaikohe and now for Northland?
Yeah, it's wicked. Mum and Dad have already planned out every weekend where we're travelling to, and even though there's COVID, there's still kind of travel wherever we go. I know Mum and Dad are crazy proud of me, but that extends out to the whānau that Mum's cousins, Dad's cousins, aunties, uncles, everyone else, they're all super proud of me. And for them, it's just seeing their girl back home.
Two stars of the game, embracing this unexpected chance to reconnect with their roots. Moti hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
if you were listening to that one on radio, we'll put Clay and Dan's piece up on our Facebook page so you can check out the video. Let's get to some of your feedback around rugby, sticking with the theme. This is on the Wallabies coming here for the Bledisloe games. This listener says, I have no problem with sports teams, even rugby teams, coming and getting special treatment because they are managed and agree to the process with the government beforehand and after they come. Individuals are much less controlled and can come from anywhere, Jack says. Another person, though, not so keen. No to the Wallabies test, they say. A game of rugby is not important enough to risk COVID into New Zealand from Oz or spectators spreading the virus in a crowd. Another listener says, when exceptions are made for special groups like film crews and sporting groups during the COVID pandemic, it just makes a farce of the restrictions placed on funerals and tangihanga. On the subject of whether some big businesses who are still turning profits yet collected the government wage subsidy should pay it back, which is what Nick Mowbray is suggesting, a New Zealand businessman. This person says, Nick is a man who walks the walk, not talks the talk. What a breath of fresh air. Love this man's integrity and commitment to putting things right. Another says, absolutely agree with Nick. The wage subsidy was made available because of the economic uncertainty at the time. But since these companies have subsequently come through unscathed, it's a no-brainer. They should pay the money back. Don't forget, you can check out all our stories online. Have a fantastic weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New Zealand Rugby says the country's quarantine protocols were significant in the country losing its bid to host the Rugby Championship. The Ministry of Health says 82% of members of the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship have been retested for the coronavirus by this morning. Today's single new case is linked to the Auckland cluster. The Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says a Labour government would dedicate 10% of spaces in managed isolation to critical and skilled workers. More than 500,000 people in the US state of Oregon have been ordered to evacuate because of a wave of wildfires. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life goes organic. And also speaks to Kiwi ecologist Nicole Masters, who's living in a horse truck in the United States. Or should that be house truck?